This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our guest today, Matthew Fox. He is an internationally acclaimed theologian and spiritual maverick who has spent the last 40 years revolutionizing Christian theology, taking on patriarchal religion, and advocating for a creation-centered spirituality of compassion and justice. He has written over 30 books, including Original Blessing. Matthew, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on with us today.
Thank you. Look forward to our discussion.
Matthew, for the sake of the people who are not familiar with you and your work, you've had this long and distinguished career that continues in an innovative way. But take us back to a turning point when you were a young priest and ran into some difficulties with the church establishment and ended up breaking with the church. Could you tell us what precipitated that? What change in you led to it?
Well, I don't think there was such a change in me. I was doing my work, which I was assigned by the Dominican order, to which I belonged for 34 years before I was expelled by Cardinal Ratzinger, who was the Inquisitor General under Pope John Paul II. John Paul II brought the Inquisition back. They silenced over 106 theologians. I named them. They're from countries all over the world. I was just one of those 106. But my positions that they did not like were listed in a letter from Ratzinger. The first was that I'm a feminist theologian. I didn't know that was a heresy, but I guess he thinks it is. The second was that I called God Mother. Well, I've proven that all the medieval mystics called God Mother. And even the Bible, on occasion, far too rarely, calls God Mother, as in Isaiah 41 or 42. With another objection, I prefer original blessing to original sin. That really got them upset because I learned that the Patriarchal Vatican is very, very, very invested in original sin, even though, as I proved in my book and other scholars have proven, Jesus never heard of original sin. No Jews ever heard of original sin. It was a 4th century concept invented by St. Augustine, and it's not primal to the teachings of Jesus at all, and yet it's become kind of the foundation of Western Christianity, and that is really a problem and an issue, because original sin, it teaches people they don't have a right to be here and they're not born beautiful and all the rest. But I think it's been secularized, frankly, by consumer capitalism. Then I think one reason consumerism overtakes us is that we have this bad opinion of ourselves. Other species know they have a right to be here, and they're doing the best they can to be appropriate to their species. So it confuses human beings terribly. And it's bad psychology, it's bad sociology, and it's terrible theology. So why is the church running on it? Another objection is that I prefer the 4 paths of grace spirituality to the original paths, purgation, illumination, and union, which again are not biblical at all, but were created by 3rd century philosophers, Plotinus and Proclus, who never even read the Bible, much less knew it. Quite anti-Semitic in their feelings. What else? They said I work too closely with Native Americans. I don't know what that means, except that I've been very blessed to be working with Native Americans.
Some of your less illustrious predecessors worked very closely in a different way.
Well, that's true. Although one good Dominican, Bartolome de las Casas, worked in Latin America. He very much stood up on behalf of indigenous peoples and paid a price for it, but he really sounded out on how badly they were treated. So, those are the objections. And another thing is, I, of course, worked with liberation theologians, and this, of course, was on the Vatican's radar as well in shooting down as much of that movement as they could. One knowledgeable priest told me that Pope John Paul II is responsible for at least 10,000 killings in South America because of his position against faith communities and liberation theology. And I prove in my book, The Pope's War, how the Vatican under John Paul II linked up with Ronald Reagan's national security agencies to kill liberation theology in Latin America. It was very much a political deal. And far right-wing head of CIA at the time, far right-wing Catholic, he made, Jim Casey, he made 29 trips to the Vatican with cash, satchels full of cash to give to John Paul II to give us solidarity in exchange for going after liberation theology in South America. So it's not a pretty story, but this is the times you and I have been living in.
Right.
And I try to do my part to stand up and speak truth to power.
Matthew, I've known the Dominicans, and there's always been, among Dominican priests and nuns, a lot of camaraderie. Did any of those Dominicans stand up in your defense when they came after you? And under the current Pope, would it be different, and would you ever be interested in being reinstated into the Dominican order, or are you done with them and very happy where you are?
Well, first of all, regarding Pope Francis, he certainly is a breath of fresh air after 34 years of John Paul II and Ratzinger. But in fact, his wonderful encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si', I'm happy to say was written, 80% of it was written by a student of mine, a Claretian priest from Ireland who was a missionary in the Philippines, John McDonough. He went through my master's program at Holy Names College in Career Spirituality. And he returned to the Philippines and he wrote several books, short books on spirituality and ecology. And obviously the Pope saw some of them and he plucked them up and took them to Rome to write his encyclical. So I lived through 34 years of two popes telling me my work was, quote, dangerous and deviant, unquote. And then a third pope was plagiarizing from my work. So I think I've lived a pretty full life. The circle is complete. I'm not pounding on the door of the church to get back in. I never signed out. I just became an Episcopalian because the Pope fired me and he didn't need my work anymore. And young Anglicans from Sheffield, England were reinventing the Mass, the liturgy, using rays. And I thought this was really important. And so I went to the Episcopal Bishop of San Francisco, Bishop Swing, and said, hey, I want to join these young people and work to reinvent worship using these new art forms of DJ and VJ and rave and rap and all this. And he said, go for it. So that's why I became Episcopalian. But I never signed any papers leaving the Catholic Church.
And so you were never excommunicated?
Well, I was expelled from the Dominican order officially under the pressure of Ratzinger. Now, you asked have Dominicans supported me. Well, I'll tell you, the Dutch Dominicans went way out of their way to support me. They made a formal request, the provincial council, to my provincial in Chicago, saying, we want to adopt Matthew Fox. We've been protecting theologians for 700 years. We know how to do it. You guys don't in America. You've never done it. So we want him, and we will let him continue his work in California, but be a part of our province. And I went to my provincial with this letter and said, hey, here's a win-win. You guys don't have to support me anymore and fight the Vatican, and the Dutch will, and I get to stay as Dominican. And my provincial, who was 10 years younger than me in the order, slammed his fist on the table and said, quote, I don't want you in any province in the world, unquote.
Wow.
And the rules are that to switch provinces, you need permission of the one you're leaving as well as the one that's accepting you. So that was the end of that. So in regard to your question, very few American Dominicans supported me. And if they did it quietly. They never told me about it. But I got support from Holland for sure and other places around the world. supported me. But it wasn't enough to.
Matthew, the term that's
The
most...
women Dominicans supported me. Let me say that.
Oh,
A
good.
lot of women Dominicans have. They're different from the men, as you probably know.
Well,
50 years ahead.
the term you're most closely associated with is creation spirituality. Can you, excuse me, define that for us and tell us the significance of it?
Sure. Well, let me say, first of all, that it was my mentor in Paris, who was a French-Dominican, Père Chenu, C-H-E-N-U, a very important church historian who was very influential at Vatican II. He was a Peritus from his Third World Bishop, brought him in as his Peritus, or coach, kind of theological coach. And he was more responsible for the most radical decree, the church in the modern world, than any other theologian. And he's the one who named the creation spiritual tradition for me when I was in class with him at the Institut Catholique in Paris, 1968. And he pointed out there are two traditions in Christianity. The fall redemption tradition begins with the fall and self-love redemption. And then this creation spiritual tradition, which is older. It's the oldest tradition in the Bible. The J source in the Hebrew Bible is creation-centered. It's also the tradition of the prophets and certainly of the wisdom tradition in Israel. And all scholars today agree that the historical Jesus comes from the wisdom tradition. So this is a tradition of Jesus, who found God in all of nature, not just in a book. And that's the basis of spirituality: creation, nature, existence, the universe, the cosmos. This is sacred in itself, and that's where spirituality really begins. So clearly, spirituality has a dimension to it that's bigger than any religion, because all religions are grounded in some way in the earth and in existence and in the cosmos. So, as I say, there's no such thing as a Roman Catholic rainforest and a Buddhist ocean and a Lutheran sun and a Baptist moon. So once religion resets itself in the context of nature and creation, it learns a little humility. And the great mystics of the West that I've been recovering, like Hildegard of Bingen, Thomas Aquinas, Meister Eckhart, Julian Norwich, Nicholas Cusa, and of course Francis of Assisi, all of these were creation-centered. They did not begin with sin. They began with the grace that creation is. As Meister Eckhart says, nature is grace. And of course, Augustine would never say that. Augustine was profoundly dualistic, and he said, spirit is whatever is not matter. Whereas Aquinas says, spirit is a elan, a vitality in everything. A blade of grass, a horse, a tree. So Aquinas was fighting Augustine's dualism, and Eckhart was, and Hildegard was, and all these creation mystics were. And of course, it's also feminist, because in the Bible, again, wisdom is feminine, as she is around the world. And it's about the quest for wisdom, not just knowledge. So it includes the cosmos. It includes the psyche's relationship to the cosmos. So creation spirituality has been a minority voice, you might say, since the church married the empire in the 4th century, and Augustine developed his theology of dualism and hatred of the body and fear of women and original sin. All that is contrary to creation spirituality. As one church historian years ago said that Augustine has been a lightning rod for right-wing movements for 1,600 years. Yes, all fundamentalism is really based on Augustine, not on Jesus' teachings, and not on the wisdom tradition of the Bible. And they're very short-changed when it comes to the quest for justice, and certainly they have very little to say about eco-justice today. In fact, they're part of the denial army, denying climate change and everything else, because they render religion so introverted and so, am I saved? As Christopher Stendhal, the great Lutheran theologian, said, a biblical scholar, he said, it's a neurotic question, am I saved? It's not in the Bible any place. It's an erotic question. And that's where a lot of right-wing Christianity has its starting point.
Interesting. Matthew, one thing I read about you, I wanted to ask. When I was a kid growing up Catholic, I was often very bored at Catholic Mass. And then I read about your techno-cosmic Mass, and I thought, I really missed the boat. Can I get back on? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said, it began in England with these young Anglicans, and it was interesting. Sheffield, England is kind of the Youngstown, Ohio of England. It's kind of the capital of the Rust Belt. When all that was collapsing in the 80s, there was a lot of unemployment, of course, and when there's a lot of unemployment, there's a lot of alcoholism and abuse of children. So a lot of these young people were kicked out of their houses by their alcoholic fathers who were unemployed because of the collapse of the steel industry. And so they gathered together, and rave was happening, and they would meet regularly and to dance together and kind of create a community that way, a rave community. And then one of them, who was quite bright, said, well, this seems a lot like religion to me. Let me go to the local pastor. So he went to an Anglican church and said to the rector, hey, can we bring our celebrations to the church, to liturgy? And I said, oh, great, do it. So they did, and they were there like 6 months. And then the pastor came in one day and said, you have to leave now. And they said, why? He said, I'm getting too many complaints that there are too many young people in church. I think that's the last time that sentence has been uttered
Exactly.
in the West ever. So they left the church, and they found a secular building downtown, a round building, and they had their masses. They call it the planetary mass. They had them there every week. And, 600, 800 people would come. And they had this strong community of 300 or 400 young people who were putting it on every time, and they're really creating community. Well, make a long story short, they visited me in America at a conference I was doing. About 6 of them did. Gave me their story with a lot of newspaper clippings. And I just finished my book on the reinvention of work. Last chapter was on reinventing ritual. And the principles are laid down there, like bringing the body back and all this, these guys were doing. So I was excited. So I flew to Sheffield and checked it out. And then I said, how can I help you guys? And they said, well, if you're becoming an Episcopal priest, you could run interference because you get what we're doing. We're using your cosmic Christ theology anyway. So I thought about it. It was just the time that the Pope had fired me. So that's when I went to Bishop Swing and said, I want to do this, work with young people to reinvent worship. So the Cosmic Mass is, it employs VJs and DJs. It's dancing our prayers more than it is sitting and daring somebody to keep us awake. We've done over 100 of these. We did one at Sounds True Festival 2 years ago for 1,000 people from all traditions. There were rabbis there and Hindus and Jews and atheists. One atheist came up afterwards and said that her whole life was changed by that experience.
Wow.
She said, I'm such a fierce atheist. When I walked down the street and there was a church there, she says, I crossed the street. I don't have to pass the church directly. But she said she pointed at her heart and said, something happened to me during the grieving. And she pointed to her heart and said, by the time communion came along, I had to have some, she said. My whole life has changed from that. So it's been a very powerful ride doing this. And we have an invitation now to do one in February at the Washington Cathedral, the Cathedral in Washington, D.C. So we're excited about that. It will be kind of a more visible presence.
I'll have to get on your mailing list and try to get to one of these days.
Great. What part of the country do you live in?
I'm in Los Angeles.
And I'm in Iowa.
Los Angeles, okay. Iowa.
You've heard of it?
Well, which is it, Iowa or Los Angeles?
No, Phil's in Los Angeles and I'm in Iowa. We're
I see. Okay, we got two people out. I get you. Okay.
Duality.
I can recommend some places in L.A., so that would love to do it.
We did an Agape one.
Oh, you did? That would be one of my recommendations, right?
Yeah.
Sorry,
I missed that. We should do another one. We did it at one of their annual conferences. Big hotel, but it was jointly sponsored. It was powerful. Afterwards, a young African American came up. I think he said he was 27. He said, this would be worth committing one's life to, he said. And it was a beautiful statement. And I failed to get his phone number. That was years ago.
we'll have to come to one day. Matthew,
Yeah.
in the description of creation spirituality, I'm reading one of the principles you list mentions the term panentheism. We had someone on recently talking about pantheism, and we didn't make that distinction. But we'd love to hear what you have to say, and how does that fit into the sort of Western traditions and Christianity specifically?
Right. Well, pantheism is two Greek words. Everything is God. God is everything. Panentheism slips in a third Greek word that says in. So it is saying everything is in God, and God is in everything. So it allows for the transcendence of divinity. So it doesn't say that God is limited to what is, but God is present in what is, and what is present in divinity. So panentheism is actually very orthodox, although most, the majority, I'd say, of Christian dogmatists don't know about it, because it's a mystical way of seeing the world. But divinity is in all things, and really Jesus is saying that when he says the kingdom of God is among you and within you. It's also present in many places in the scriptures, like in the book of Acts, that God is the one in whom we all live, move, and have our being. So like atheism, panentheism, and like pantheism, panentheism rejects theism. That is to say, theism says, we're here and God's up there someplace. The prayer is about getting God to come down here. We say, no, divinity is already here, which is what Jesus is saying. The kingdom of God is among you. It's already here. We got to get out of the way. That's what Eckhart says. He says, God is at home. We're out for a walk, says Eckhart. We've gone out for a walk. So we have to return home, and that's at the heart of it. But it's about our mystical experience. Now, a 13th century mystic, Mechtilde Magdeburg, who was a Beguine, a member of the women's movement of the Middle Ages, she said, the day of my spiritual awakening was the day I saw and knew I saw all things in God and God in all things. That's panentheism. And it's present. It's certainly present in those images from John's Gospel about Christ being in the vine and in the Father, and the Father in us, and the vine and so forth. So it's all kinds of images in the Scripture about it. But I think it really helps to name it. As you say, it's not just theism, it's not pantheism, and it's not atheism, it's panentheism. And they can't burn you at the stake for it. That's really cool.
Matthew, growing up Catholic and going to seminary, becoming a priest, that's a huge commitment, and probably a lot of decisions along the way. And obviously you're very progressive, and you were thinking beyond the doctrine of the church. Were you always like that? And were there mentors? Were there priests, nuns, religious people, non-religious people that had a big influence in you as you were growing up and as you were in your early days becoming a priest?
Well, when I was a junior in high school, between my junior and senior year, I read Tolstoy's War and Peace. And I told a friend it blew my soul wide open, and it did. And I wanted to explore what happened to me. Now, of course, I have language for it. It was a mystical experience. All I knew at the time was it blew my soul wide open, and I wanted to explore it. And that was really a lot to do with my becoming a Dominican. I was on a search to find out what a spiritual experience is and what it's all about. Now, I attended a public high school, and my closest friends were Protestant or atheist or Jewish, and we would have these regular debates about life and philosophy. Then I'd go to my parish priest, who was a Dominican, and he would have me reading G.K. Chesterton or Thomas Aquinas or something. So that the intellectual side to faith meant a lot to me from an early age, and that's one more reason I was attracted to the Dominicans. So that was a big part. My family was very open-minded, especially my mother, and they tried to expose us to many different kinds of people and religions, and that was part of my background. And my brothers and sisters, I was one of 7 children, were very inquisitive. My older brother was a scientist, really, and 2 older brothers, and that influenced me. And Also, I lost my legs when I was 12. I had polio, and they couldn't tell me if I'd walk again. So when my legs came back after about a year, I felt great gratitude to the universe, and I said this. I said, I'll never take my legs for granted again. And I think in retrospect, that's a very mystical statement that, mysticism is about not taking our breath for granted, and that everything is sacred and is a gift. And so I think that was part of my background too. But, I've been blessed by many teachers over the years. Again, Père Chanou was the most important. Thomas Merton, I wrote him when the Dominicans said I could go on and study spirituality in Europe. They didn't know where I should go, so I wrote Merton. He said, go to Paris. And he wrote me a very powerful letter back, a very rich letter. And so he was certainly an influence on me. I'd read his autobiography when I was in high school, and I was moved, especially by the contemplative dimension to it. So all these writers were always important to me, and they've always, and even to this day, of course, I'm moved by a lot of scholars who move me, and of course scientists. If you can't talk about nature and creation without reading what scientists have to say. So I've been blessed to be able to work with a number of scientists over the years too. Rupert Sheldrake, Brian Slim, Thomas Berry, and others. And they've been discovering a whole new cosmology, which is of tremendous importance to all of us, whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
To learn the universe is 2 trillion galaxies big, which we learned a year and a half ago.
I'm glad you mentioned
your head off.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Merton. So many of our interviewees, his name keeps coming up. So I'm hoping people will rediscover him or discover him anew if they haven't. One of the other terms in the literature about you is one I've heard used by people in different traditions. It's the cosmic Christ. What does that mean in your terms, and how is it different from the person we associate with the term Christ?
Well, I see a healthy Christianity flying on 2 wings. The wing of the historical Jesus, who, as you say, is the person who lived and taught and got killed by the empire and some bad religious leaders in league with the empire. And then the cosmic Christ is the tradition of the image of God, the light of God that's in all beings, as John 1 says, the light that's in all beings. Now science says that photons or light waves are in every atom in the universe, so that's something very parallel. So it's also in the East, it's the Buddha nature. So it's the presence of the divine in all beings. And that tradition is, some people say, it's so New Age. No, it goes back to Paul, the first writer in the Bible, the Christian Bible. Also the Gospel of Thomas, which is as old as Paul. They both have the idea of the cosmic Christ, like in Gospel of Thomas, it says, split the wood and I am there, or lift up the rock and I am there. All those I am sayings that we have in John's Gospel, too, these are cosmic Christ sayings. But really, all the great events in the life of the historical Jesus are pictured in the Gospels in a cosmic context. For example, the Nativity. So the scholars will say, these birth stories and all this is not history. No, it's not. But it's mythology. It's huge stories about the cosmos itself. So you've got at Christmas, you've got the 4-legged ones, you've got the ox in the manger, you've got angels, they're always cosmic beings, you've got shepherds who are living with sheep, and the whole scene is a cosmic scene. The same is true with Jesus' baptism. The sky opens up. Well, that's kind of cosmic. And there's a voice, this is my beloved. You have it at the Transfiguration when Jesus goes to the top of the mountain with 3 of his friends. And they see him as radiant. They see him as light coming out of him. That's the cosmic Christ. It's in all of us. So that's the teaching of the cosmic Christ, that it's in all beings, and it's divine in all beings, and it's also the universe itself, like Paul says in Colossians, that everything in the heavens and on the earth, Christ is holding them together, everything in heaven, everything on earth. Now, you mentioned Thomas Merton. He had this mystical experience one day during lunchtime, in downtown Louisville, and the next day he wrote in his journal, how do you tell everyone they're walking around shining like the sun as you went? Well, that's the cosmic Christ that he saw, and many mystics see this at times. The light coming out of all beings. That's the Christ in all of us, or the Buddha nature if you prefer, or if you're Jewish, the image of God in all beings, not just in humans, but in all beings. So that's the tradition.
Matthew, one last question from me, and that is, what advice do you give to somebody who's out there, who's a Catholic or a Christian, or maybe even not a Christian, that's listening to you and not finding the fulfillment they would like to be following in their religious beliefs or their traditions, or they might even be atheists? What advice, what do you recommend to them to find that deeper meaning in life and that more cosmic religion?
Well, Albert Einstein said that we're moving into the third stage of religion. He said the third stage of religion will be a cosmic religion. And he said this will unite all religions, and it's the one path to peace on the earth, and it will supersede all nationalism and all tribalism. And of course, he wrote this in the wake of the Holocaust and the Second World War and all the rest. And he felt that religion, the church, both Protestant and Catholic, had really failed to stand up to Hitler in any big way. Of course, individuals like Bonhoeffer and so forth stood up, but Pope Pius XII was pretty closed-mouthed most of the time, etc., etc. So he was pretty pissed, as I think he has a right to be, about the failures of religion in the 20th century. But I think it's interesting, though, a man of his depth and intelligence was looking at the history of religion and said the next stage is a cosmic religion. So this, too, is where the cosmic Christ comes in. So what I would advise people is to begin where Rabbi Heschel begins. To begin with awe and wonder. What fills you with awe? What fills you with wonder? That's the first stage. That's what the mystics call the via positiva. That's the first step of a mystical life. And then you want to fill yourself up with that. Because the next phase, the via negativa, is about silence, and that's a good thing. Awe, in fact, leads to silence. So meditation or stilling the monkey mind or the reptilian brain, calming the reptilian brain, that's very important. But another side of the via negativa is, of course, suffering. So suffering also breaks us open, and it leads to a cosmic experience, because when your heart breaks, the whole universe breaks for you. And Joanna Macy, the Buddhist, says that when your heart breaks, the whole universe can pour through. So heartbreak is another path to divinity or to spirit, even despair. A lot of people are in despair today, given the state of the world and the state of the earth and the state of our country. But despair itself can also open us up. Father B. Griffiths, a wonderful Christian monk who lived in India over 50 years, he says many people do not experience God or spirit until they go into despair. For example, a lot of people in AA and so forth, they've undergone this kind of breakdown that opens their soul up to something deeper. So pay attention to that, to the darkness in oneself. Don't take a pill when you're feeling depressed. The mystics have a word for that. It's called the dark night of the soul. Explore it. Ask what it has to teach you and why we're experiencing this group dark night today as a species, which I think we are. Then the third path of spirituality is creativity, the via creativa. And that's, many people will talk about how they feel carried along by spirit when they're in a creative state. And you have to pay attention to that. Give it attention. Give it your time. It's very important. Yes, you are being carried along by the Spirit. Thomas Aquinas says that the same Spirit that hovered over creation at the beginning hovers over the mind of the artist at work. So creativity is still going on. We're co-creating the Spirit. Then the fourth path or experience of the spiritual journey is the via transformativa, compassion and justice. So our work for justice, for equal justice, for example, today, for any kind of justice, standing up to power, speaking truth to power, and paying the price, this is also an experience of the divine, because in our tradition, justice is God. God is compassion. So, and we're not alone. The Dalai Lama says we can do away with all religion, but we can't do away with compassion. Compassion is my religion. So that the work we do on behalf of compassion and justice, that is working with the divine forces as well. So I think people have these experiences. We call them the four paths of free spirituality. They have these experiences when they go deep, and so they should be named for what they are. And whether you attach the word God to it, the word God, of course, carries a lot of baggage with it.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole right wing has been exploiting this word and defaming it for decades in our country, and so, we have to step away. Meister Eckhart, the great mystic, says, I pray God to rid me of God. It's a wonderful line.
Yeah.
So that puts me in the room with a lot of atheists.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Very good. We really appreciate your coming on. We don't have much time. I want to call people's attention to the Fox Institute for Creation Spirituality, which they can learn about online. And I was going to ask you to really briefly, because we have to leave, to define the Order of the Sacred Earth.
Oh, yeah, this is my most recent project. I'm working with two young people, a 28-year-old woman, a 33-year-old man. And we're starting a new order called the Order of the Sacred Earth. It will not belong to any particular religious tradition, but it will not turn us back on it. We hope people will join from Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, the goddess religion, native religions, whatever, Islam, and join us because it's about taking a vow, one vow we'd all take, and that is, I promise to be the best lover of Mother Earth, the best defender of Mother Earth that I can be. That's the one vow that will bind us together. We're having our first vows on winter solstice, December 21st, at a Buddhist center, Sacred Spring in Berkeley, and they could go online and learn more about this. It's going to be live streamed, so they could participate from other parts of the country. And we put out a book. It's not formally out. The formal book comes out in the spring, but we put out a first version at this time that you can get through our organization. But I think it's time, the time's running out for our species. We don't have time for a new religion or for a new church, but for an order, yes, orders are much more flexible than religions. And this is the first order, perhaps, that's consciously ecumenical, deeply ecumenical. You don't have to belong to any religion. Atheists are welcome too if you agree on this vow and the values involved in it. So we hope that this should be a community and a movement that charges people and gathers people, and what I call intergenerational wisdom that's needed today. So I'm an old guy, I'm in my 70s. These people are young in their 20s and 30s. Let's start working together and bring the wisdom alive and the action that has to flow from it. So that's what the Order of the Sacred Earth is about.
Great.
And,
we'll make sure we post this before December 21st.
Right.
Terrific. Please do. Please do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting stuff. Fascinating. And I really look
Thank
forward.
you.
I'm going to find myself to one of these techno-cosmic masses because I've been through all the other masses,
Terrific.
and this sounds like one I'd really enjoy. So thank you so much.
I'm going to get you to LA. So thank you very much. It's been an honor to talk to you, and I hope our paths cross in person.
I enjoyed your good questions, and I'm glad you have a program like this. These programs are important.
All the best.
All the best.
I know.